Welcome to Maritime Outdoors. Here you'll find outdoor chores and activities in the maritime provinces of Canada. Nestled near the Bay of Fundy, we will showcase my John Deere 1025R, my Stihl MS 291, a homemade wood splitter, various Frontier John Deere attachments in the garden, offloading tractor trailers, snow blowing, and we may do some hiking, biking, maybe even some kayaking and hunting as well. So thanks for joining me on our first episode. Today we use the 1025R with the HLM, I believe, pallet forks to finish what is a left of cutting and splitting 6 cord of firewood. I recently bought the 1025R from Green Diamond Equipment in Sussex, and very recently bought a Stihl MS 291 to replace my 20-year-old Husqvarna F45cc chainsaw, which recently started losing power. I'm very pleased with this bigger saw, new bar and chain. Having the upgrade will help me with my mostly maple pulpwood that I cut every year for our main source of heat. Traditionally, this area is home to what is referred to as the Acadian forest, or the Acadian forest type, which is typically a mix of some hardwood, broadleaf, and a majority softwood, with pine, spruce, cedar, balsam fir, silver, white, and yellow birch, some poplar, oak, beech, and maple, all in the mix. There are up to, depending on which source you read, 60 different species or subspecies of tree in our Acadian forest. One of the most popular hardwoods in the region for firewood, due to its abundance and its BTU content, is maple, which to me is unfortunate because it's also used for maple syrup. So maple is my preference, other than white birch. I like the smell and how easy white birch splits, but you have to get to white birch relatively quickly after it's cut, or it will very quickly rot. It has less BTUs, and of course, like I said, it's susceptible to rot, so you really need to cut it, split it, and start seasoning it right away, whereas the maple will last a little bit longer. Now, one thing I've noticed, a caveat, I guess, before I get into any issues I've had with my maple this year. This year, I took a delivery of maple from a guy up the road in Welsford. Some of the best. It was all maple. I think I had 1 stick of birch and 6 cord of wood. So it was all maple, and the maple all looked very good from the outside. Some of them, when I cut into them, were rotten in the middle, and that is somewhat common for maple, depending on what the soil substrate was like that it came from. If it came from a swampier, wetter area, you'll see the heartwood here in the video that can rot if it's too wet. So a lot of the maple that I got was rotten. I found some with mushrooms on the inside, some sort of eggs on the inside, which I hope do not spread to the maples that I have around my property right now. But I'm very happy with the volume of wood the mass or the volume of wood that I was given. Typically, I buy pulpwood length hardwood, and I cut it myself like I'm doing in this video to save money. And I really enjoy being out cutting it and splitting it, using the equipment that I have. The wood splitter is my neighbor's, and I'm very fortunate to have good neighbors that allow me to use their equipment. And of course, we share equipment. I will help them with snow blowing and snow clearing this winter for the areas that they can't get with their snow plow. So you'll see videos of that. The John Deere tractor is new for me this year. I bought it brand new. It was a little something that I finally bought for myself, and we use it primarily for my business. Part of this wood is going to be heating my office for my business, which we have another YouTube page that covers that stuff. But snow clearing for the business, for people that come to the shop in the winter. And the pallet forks, of course, are to unload tractor trailers of canoes, kayaks, and paddle gear. We also sell Malone trailers made in Maine. So they come on a longer pallet, so I have to have the snowblower or the tiller on the back of the tractor for ballast so that I don't put too much load on my front axle of the tractor. So you'll see videos of that as we roll out this new YouTube page. So here I'm splitting my maple hardwood. The splitter works very well. I got to be careful with my fingers, and I'm very cognizant of my fingers and situational awareness as I use this. Many people have, of course, been injured in the past with wood splitters and things. Luckily, this isn't a super fast wood splitter, so it gives you some reaction time. Now, one thing I've noticed in using last year's season firewood is that some of my pieces are a little bit big for starting the fire. Of course, I've got kindling, but I don't have any intermediate size pieces. I typically, you see the size of the wood here, typically get this and I'll cut it, or I'll split it in either half, and sometimes I'll split it in quarters. Well, I hadn't split last year's in a lot of quarters, so I've got a bunch of halves of average 12-inch diameter logs. So they're kind of big, great for overnight, but horrible for efficiency until the stove is up to temperature. We use and we bought it 3 years ago, roughly, after we purchased this land and house. We replaced the wood stove that was here with a brand new Pacific Energy Super 27, which so far I'm fairly happy with. Kind of question why Pacific Energy would select stainless steel for the overhead baffle system. It's going to decrease the temperature you can run your stove at. If it was all cast iron, then you can run that at a little bit higher temperature. Stainless, people think of stainless as being a very strong metal, but in comparison to cast iron, and I'd have to look at all the numbers, but pretty sure stainless will not take as high a temperature before it starts becoming more and more ductile. It'll soften sooner than cast iron, which is why most exterior metals on fireplaces are cast iron. You have your fire brick that lines the inside, and then your cast iron. Well, the Super 27 has stainless up above the firebox, and if you overfire that stove, it can very quickly and easily deform your baffle system up above, which mine in 3 years has done. It's actually drooping noticeably, which is partly my own fault, because I started my fire up with the damper wide open a few times to try and get it going. I'd go do something on the computer, come back, and of course it would be, I added a thermometer to the top of the stove too to help prevent overfiring, but I've still ended up doing that. So other than that, it heats our house relatively well. When it's minus 30 out, it starts to struggle a little bit, and we have to turn on some electric heat at that point, and that's with it running as hot as I can get it without it being over temperature. So the saw here that you see in all of this video, you don't see any of my Husqvarna. I still have it, but I actually got my Husqvarna back when I was in junior high school. It was actually a payment that I received from my dad for working on our whale watching boat for the summer, and I spent a lot of time in the woods, which I think is part of the reason that I enjoy doing this, cutting firewood and stuff. But as a kid, a teenager, preteen, both my brother and I built camps up behind our house where we were originally from. Trails, bridges for ATV trails, the whole 9 yards. So I'm fairly comfortable, which sometimes isn't a good thing, with the saw in my hand. You'll see a couple of mistakes that I make, obviously, with this one. It does have the grab teeth at the base of the bar, which can be good, and it's not so good for the clutch, so I try not to use that too much, except for the small pieces to keep them from kicking out when I'm trying to cut them. So This new saw we purchased from Granite Town Farms in St. George, friends of ours. Glenn and Polly Cox are their proprietors there. Very happy with the saw so far. Of course, every new piece of equipment works great when it's new, but so far I've been very happy with this saw. So my Husqvarna was a 45cc, and the MS 291 I believe is just a touch over 55. So it's a little bit bigger saw, and you can tell. I mean, it's still in the break-in period. I'm on my second tank of fuel now, and that should tell you how efficient it is. It just took me two tanks of fuel to cut through, I would estimate, probably a cord and a half of wood. So it works very well, and this is all maple that I'm cutting, and it goes through it fairly quickly and efficiently. So as long as I keep the chain sharp, and I typically sharpen my chain depending on how hard the wood is, and if I'm hitting anything around the wood like the ground, which is why I've got these little pieces of wood here that I'm using to prevent me from hitting the ground. Typically every second fuel up, sometimes every fuel up, I'll run a file across it just to keep it nice and sharp. 3 of my uncles on my mother's side of the family all cut wood, or one of them actually sold Husqvarna chainsaws, being from Scandinavian country originally, or his family was. He sold Husqvarna equipment. But one of my other uncles, when I was younger, when I first got my Husqvarna, and he sharpened it for the first time for me and helped me, show me how to properly sharpen it and file the raker and all of these things. One of the pieces of advice that he gave me was let the saw do the cutting. The weight of the saw should be able to cut through the wood, and if it isn't, then you need to sharpen it. If you force the saw with your own weight, or if with a little bit of muscle strength there, you can prematurely wear out your clutch. So something that I'm trying to be very cognizant of, you'll see most of the time, unless it's a smaller piece of wood, I will cut the piece of wood closer to the tip of the bar than the base of the saw. And that is to allow the saw to do the work instead of me binding the chain and subsequently damaging the clutch. One thing that does get tedious and kind of grows on me year over year, not in a good way, is piling the freaking wood. Last spring I was out on my deck in the middle of the night taking some pictures of the moon, and I assume it was the frost knocked over the far left pile of wood, scaring the crap out of me because it sounded like a bear was coming across the yard, thumping its feet. So I yelled in the middle of the night to try and scare it. As I looked over and my pupils came back to normal shape, I noticed that it was the firewood pile. So I've been a little bit more conscious of how I pile my wood, where I pile it on the stack, and make sure that everything's nice and tight. In saying that, because we've got more wood this year, in what I expected to be typically 5 1/4 to 5 1/2 cord, I think I've got closer to 6, which is what I paid for. Now I'm stacking it higher on some of the racks, so I've got to be careful and keep an eye to make sure that it doesn't start leaning from wind or from frost. I'm very busy with a full-time job, running a business on the side, and a few other ventures that I do out of enjoyment. It takes me the better part of the summer to cut the pulpwood to 16-inch lengths, split it, and then pile it. If I was able to go at piling 6 cord of wood, it would probably only take me a day of piling. But I like to keep my work area clean, so I typically will process through a couple of cord of the 16-inch lengths, split it, and then pile it and get it out of the way to keep the work area clean and a little safer. But this is my final day piling. That took me a couple hours to finish off, and I don't like my yard being messy, both from a clutter standpoint and then from sawdust and things on the ground. So in the end, I use the tractor kind of like a broom and a dustpan and clean up what's left. Thanks for watching this first video. If you like what you saw, if you enjoyed the video, you can support the page by subscribing and hitting the bell button, which gives you notifications of new videos. We'd also appreciate it if you gave us ideas for what you'd like to see moving forward. So you can comment below, send us a message on our YouTube page. Thank you again for watching.